Senator Tom Carper spoke in support of President Biden's new National Environmental Policy Act rule on the Senate floor last week. The Delaware Democrat said this rule is necessary to combat climate change, adding that, quote, blocking these regulations from taking effect is the policy equivalent of burying our heads in the sand. Republican senators have countered that the rule will slow down all infrastructure, construction, and energy projects. The Inflation Reduction Act, which just passed in the Senate on Sunday, includes numerous investments in climate protection.
Mr. President.
Senator for Delaware.
Mr. President, normally at this time of the week, Senator Capito and I are gathering for a face-to-face meeting or maybe having a meeting by phone as she heads back to West Virginia. And today it looked like we weren't going to have a chance to meet, but here we are. And ironically, most of those conversations we have are we're like in sync. It's pretty amazing. Most folks around the country probably think we never agree on anything here, but we do, and we actually turned out to be pretty good friends. A couple of West Virginia kids here grew up and made out all right, and it's always a pleasure to be with her and to serve with her. Help write the bipartisan infrastructure legislation. Last week we were here to pass not one, not two, but three bipartisan pieces of legislation. A couple of them pretty big, two big recycling bills, and then another one dealing with Water Resources Development Act for Army Corps of Engineers. I think we had one negative vote on the reauthorization of the Army, one, and on the recycling legislation, one of which was your bill, I think one was mine, and we were co-sponsors in all together. But we had no opposition on those bills. So I would say to folks watching today, say, oh, there they go again. Well, you should have tuned in last week because we're on the same page. But having said that, let me say that I rise today to speak on a joint resolution of disapproval to nullify President Biden's National Environmental Policy Act regulations, oftentimes referred to as NEPA, N-E-P-A. Last year, as we drafted legislation that became the bipartisan infrastructure law for our country, Senator Capito and I, along with our colleagues on the Environment and Public Works Committee, to which my colleague from Alaska is a valued member, Senator he's here, and I think he's offered this resolution today, and Dan will be back here in a minute, I'm sure. But as we drafted the legislation that became the bipartisan infrastructure law, Senator Capito and I, along with our colleagues on the EPW committee, considered ways to get infrastructure projects done more efficiently while maintaining environmental protections. I'll say that again. We considered a number of ways to get infrastructure projects done more efficiently while maintaining environmental protections. We included several changes that were reflective of those shared goals. In fact, we included quite a few of those changes. For example, I'll give you an example of one of those, Mr. President. The bipartisan infrastructure law codified something that is called one federal decision permitting structure. It set a goal for completing environmental reviews of transportation projects within 2 years. It also permanently authorized the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council and more. But as we consider changes to the way we deliver infrastructure projects, we always tried to make sure that we were not undermining important environmental safeguards. That sentiment reflects really the essence of the law that we call NEPA. Over 50 years ago, President Richard Nixon, a Republican as you'll recall, signed this bedrock environmental policy into law with overwhelming bipartisan support. And in the time since then, NEPA has helped to ensure that federal actions protect our quality of life and avoid costly environmental impacts. And NEPA is not just a means of protecting resources and conserving pristine environment. NEPA also helps to improve federal decisions. And how is that? Well, by requiring agencies to take a hard look at the impacts of their agencies before they make decisions, For example, through their NEPA process, just a few years ago, officials in Colorado, here's a good example, officials in Colorado heard robust public feedback when planning improvements on State Highway number 9. And that led them to take steps to minimize disturbances to communities and to the environment. The final project was ultimately delivered with lower emissions, less harm to wildlife, and safer space for cyclists. Importantly, these benefits did not come at the cost of efficiency. Listen to this. The project was done on time and under budget. And this is only one of any number of examples that I could cite today. And making smart decisions has never been more important. After all, the science is clear. We must rapidly drive down greenhouse gas emissions if we hope to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Unfortunately, the Trump administration made changes to the NEPA rules. These changes prevented agencies from considering how their actions impact climate change and from taking common sense steps to minimize environmental harm. The regulatory rollback also undermined public involvement in the federal decision-making process. And this rollback harmed communities of color, including tribal and Native Alaskan communities that rely on NEPA to defend their voices. Fortunately, the Biden administration has taken steps to fix the error of these regulatory revisions, and under President Biden's instruction, the Council on Environmental Quality finalized a rule in April to make a narrow, targeted change to NEPA regulations. One of the most important changes was restoring the requirement for agencies to consider the cumulative and indirect impact of their actions. Considering such impacts can help ensure that we avoid actions that worsen climate change and negatively impact communities. President Biden's NEPA rule would ensure that agencies conduct environmental review process in a common sense, holistic manner, one that neither sacrifices efficiency for environmental protection nor the other way around. And this action comes at a critical time for our nation. The bipartisan infrastructure law will fund more than $1 trillion of investments in projects that will last not for years, but for decades and maybe even longer. I believe the decision here is clear. The projects under review today will either help address the climate crisis and protect communities, or they'll exacerbate emissions and make us more vulnerable. With thoughtful environmental analysis, we can build new facilities that are less emission intensive. We can build highways and bridges to withstand the kind of extreme weather that we're experiencing all over this country, in fact, all over the planet. And we can save money while we do it with infrastructure that's built to last. Blocking these regulations from taking effect is a policy equivalent of burying our heads in the sand. And unfortunately, with the rate at which the sea level is rising around us, and it is, during the course of debate on this one proposal today, we're going to see in the state of Louisiana, where they have terrible sea level rises going on, every 100 minutes they lose a piece of land in Louisiana the size of a football field. And during the course of this debate alone, they're going to lose several more football fields in Louisiana, a lot more in the days to come. Refusing to consider the impacts of climate change will not stop the climate from changing. It will not save the lives being lost from wildfires, from floods and heat waves. It will not stop asphalt from melting under extreme heat, is what was happening a couple of weeks ago in England and over the Tour de France, where you had to spill thousands, tens of thousands of gallons of water on the course that they're running the bicycle race, Tour de France. Literally tens of thousands of gallons on the course in order to keep the roads from melting. You can believe that. By refusing to consider the impacts of climate change now, we will only help ensure that its worst impacts come to pass. It will continue to cost us. It will cost us not just in dollars, but also in lives. And with that, I urge my colleagues to vote on this well-intentioned, but I think misguided resolution. Before I yield the floor, let me just say what a privilege it is to work with my colleague from Alaska. And he and I actually agree on more than you might imagine. And we both worn the uniform of our country for many years. Marine Corps, Navy salutes Marine Corps today. I like to say different uniforms, same team. And while I can't be with him on this one, we'll find other things that we can agree on today. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.